Hello, group, and welcome back to James Moran. Is that correct how I say your last name, James?
Absolutely.
Okay, now as we all know, James is our contact in the States. He's an astrologer and he's an author and a new dad. And he has his own YouTube. Is it you? It's YouTube you've got on where you put all your posts and stuff.
Yeah, YouTube channel. Yep. I have my own personal YouTube channel, James Moran Astrologer. I'm also part of something called the Archetypal News Network. That's another
Right.
YouTube channel. A lot of great astrology information on it.
Great. So if anybody wants to follow up with James and see what he's done, just put James Moran into the YouTube and he'll come up and he specializes in, is it the psychedelic astrology?
Yeah, it's the tradition of archetypal astrology that does come from, it's derived from the research into psychedelic assisted healing and is paired with that healing modality.
And I feel that's going to become more and more mainstream as we move with Pluto into Aquarius. But that aside, we
Mhm.
are in authorship month. And today, James is going to share his expertise and knowledge on how to create a short story.
Yes.
So,
How
James,
to, yes, yes.
how,
Please ask
how,
your
do,
questions. I'm
how do you
happy to
go
talk
about
about it.
creating a short story?
Well, I'll say first off, it is going to be different for different people. So it's not going to be entirely prescriptive thing in terms of this is how you do it. Um, so part of that is left in the lap of the person who wants to write the short story for them to kind of navigate their own style, their own voice, their own inclination. Um, I can talk about how I go about creating short stories. And there might
That
be
might
some
be a
over.
good idea because then that'll give people a bit of a template.
Yeah, okay. Usually what happens is I usually get seized by a impulse, and a, a, a kind of a a call, I guess you could say, like a call to create a short story. It could come as kind of a thought experiment that I'm playing. I'm just thinking and I imagine, what if X led to Y, led to Z? Um, and then suddenly I feel the urge to create a narrative around that is hard to resist. I feel that I could resist it, but if I do, it will not be good for my kind of mental health, psycho-spiritual health, because something is coming from my subconscious that wants to be explored in the short story form. So yeah, like a thought, it might come up as a series of thoughts, like kind of a thought experiment, or even an image, or even a kind of like a vague emotion or something like that. And usually it comes with enough force, enough kind of propulsion that it urges me to play with it, to explore it. Um, and if I can usually determine if it's short story, there's a few factors that go into me determining if it's going to be a short story or if it's going to be a novel, um, or even there's different in my life, there's different categories according to length. So there's a poem, which is potentially the shortest.
Yep.
And there's a short story, and even within short story, there's some variation. There's like a flash fiction story, which could be a very short story, could be as short as like a page or
Mm.
2 pages, called flash fiction. Or a short story could be, 20 pages or even 40 pages or something like that. And then there's plays. I also write plays, and those are usually longer, maybe 60, 70 pages or longer. Um, and then there's like a novella or a novel, which is going to be longer than that. And so I kind of assess like this feeling I have, this feeling that I want to explore this topic, theme, emotion, whatever it is, or even character or something, is what's the feeling I guess I assess it from a couple angles. One is like, what's the feeling? Does it feel like I'm gonna need, how much length does it feel like I'm gonna need to explore that theme? And then my other angle is, what's my logistical uh shape of life right now? What are the demands of my life right now? What are the demands of my time? What's the shape of my schedule? So what can I realistically pull off? Like I might get an idea that goes bigger than a short story, like a novel or something, but I just don't have the logistical bandwidth to wrestle with that. So I decide to pare it down into something shorter, like a play or a short story. Or it might just come to me as a little short story. And then I'm like, even then, how much time do I have? I might have a very busy week, and I might say, okay, am I going to do flash fiction? Is it just going to be a one-page story? Am I going to try to elaborate on it and spend more time on it, which means that I'm going to need more space in my schedule and make it like, like maybe 6,000 words or something like that. Flash fiction stories oftentimes under 1,000 words and sometimes well under 1,000 words. So those are the first things that happen. Um, and then once I've determined, once I've got just kind of a general loose grasp on all that, because it can always change, um, I sit down, I try to find time and space. I sit down to write. For me, the mornings tend to be good time. The earlier, the better. My mind's more fresh. It's less cluttered by the sundry demands of the day. And I just start writing. And for me personally, what I do is I don't put too much pressure on myself to get it right or to execute something that I put any expectations on myself around at all whatsoever, because I know I can always change it later. Um, I know I can always improve it later. I know I can always rework it, revise it, refine it. I can totally reconstruct it, whatever needs to happen, I can do that over time. So I don't put any restraints on myself. So I just sit down, just see what happens, see what happens. And that's kind of the fun part, without restraints and restrictions, you can just kind of see, what is this theme? What is it? What's shaping up in my mind? What's the plot? What are the elements of the story? What are the characters? What's the world? Um, so that's the beginning. That's kind of like, you could say, like the initiation of creating a short story for me. Um, and I can talk a bit further about further stages if you like.
But let's just recap on that for a minute. So
Yeah.
the way it works for you personally, and it's different for every
Mhm.
person, you get like a calling, something, a vision or a word or something you see or an experience or a feeling or a photo or a picture ignites your it ignites your imagination to write a short story.
Yes,
And a
indeed.
short story can be 20 pages to 40 pages. When you say pages, is that A4 or A5?
A4, A5, what is that referring to? Is that like the
A4
size
is full scap and A5 is half of that.
um like yeah,
Like if you were doing it
eight
to
by
set
11.
it out for a book, for example.
Uh-huh. Um, I don't know. Maybe I should know, but I don't know. I mean,
Most books are A5.
okay. I actually, I mean, I write in Word, and the pages, it's an 8.5 by 11 template. Um, so I write. Actually, I usually write first drafts by hand, and I tend to write in notebooks, various sizes and
I
shapes
do
of
that.
notebooks.
I do that.
Um,
Yep.
yeah. So I just kind of,
There's just that connection with the brain and your hand. It just
yeah.
seems to flow a lot more easier.
Oh yeah,
And
I
then
get
putting
that.
it on the computer is sort of the next step
Totally,
for me. Yeah.
totally. So yeah, I'll write it by hand, and I'll just kind of see what happens. And then I'll put it, I'll revise it and eventually put it in Word usually.
Yeah.
Um, yeah.
So 20 to 40 pages is acceptable as a short
Yeah,
story?
let's see. Like a short story, I think when you try to get published in any publishing venue that publishes short stories like journals and magazines, a lot of it's online now these days, but like say an online journal or online magazine, they tend to, most don't publish over like it's rare to find someone that publishes over 6,000 words as a short story. They might, they might go to 8,000 or 10,000 or something like that. But I mostly see that 6,000 is kind of the limit. I think a novella is like, geez, I should know this. I don't know, maybe it's there's also something called a novelette between like maybe 20,000 words and 40,000 words or something like that.
Thrown all these words at me that I never knew. You are so knowledgeable. The first one that you said was a flash fiction, and I thought,
Flash
oh my
fiction, yeah.
God, that's something really new. And then novella I'd heard of. And what was
Uh-huh.
the other one you just said?
Well, novelette, I've been seeing that
Novelette,
more
yeah.
recently. Yeah, I think that's even shorter than a novella, if I have that correctly. Maybe I'm wrong, but
It
yeah,
sounds
it's
like it
basically
would be
different.
shorter.
Yeah,
Hmm.
it's categories according to word count. So like flash fiction would be 1,000 words and under. A short story would be 1,000 words and above, up until
So
whatever
about
the novel
between
thing.
1,000
Yeah,
and 6,000.
yeah, something like that. I'm sure it goes longer in some cases, but anyways, that's and then how many pages is that? That's, yeah, it's like
Doesn't
20
really
pages.
matter as long as the word count is there,
Yeah, sure.
don't you think?
Yeah, yeah.
So once you've got the idea of what you want to talk about, do you sort of work with a board, like you go main character, um, personality of that character, who are they connected to? Like, do you work with a storyboard or anything like that, or do
I
you just do
don't.
it
I
organically?
don't. I do it organically, particularly with a short story. Like if I get into a novel, I might do some um kind of, yeah, I might use like large format paper just to, like, I have one in front of me over here. Just to kind of explore like plot structure, explore themes, character arcs, things like that. And I don't have any formula because it probably looks pretty different every time according to what the story itself, the story shape kind of wants to elicit from me. Um, but yeah, with short stories, I don't, I, I have not done that. No.
No, just asking because I remembered when I was I did a course with Hay House. And
Mm,
one of the things that they mentioned in that course was, a writer's course, was the story format. And that's why I
mhm.
just asked whether it was something, whether you used like putting up some butcher's paper or a whiteboard and sort of connecting all the dots of who knew who and the subplots and all those kinds of things. And they had them all on the board. And then all they needed to do was to bring that into the story and making sure that they hadn't missed anything as they were going through. They just crossed off as soon as it was in
Yeah,
the
again,
format.
it's kind of like to each their own, for some, it really depends on what is the style of the creative mind of the person
Mm.
writing the story, like how do they, some people are more visual. They might like a storyboard even with images.
And for visual people, like as you're saying, that's probably a better way for them to work.
Yeah, it could be,
Yeah.
they might like, and then there's different approaches to structure. Some people might like to have the structure up front, some people might like to have the structure afterwards. It really depends on, it's, part of writing the story isn't just writing the characters and the plot and all the different elements of a story. It's actually discovering what is the process that this particular story wants to summon you through. Like it's every story is almost like its own animal, and it's kind of initiating you or inviting you into its process. And so it's good, in my experience, to not have totally predetermined sense of how it should go. because oftentimes story will dictate how it should go to us, and we're kind of there to
Right.
feel it, you know?
And yeah, that makes sense, and
Yeah.
especially most writers are quite
Mhm.
creative anyway. And sometimes, I mean, I think it's nice to have a bit of a plan, but it's also
Mhm.
nice to have that creative process where if you go over the plan, it doesn't really matter so much. The plan is a bit of the guideline, but I think
Yeah.
that creative journey is more important. But I was about to say, providing you don't put the ending at the beginning, but then again, in stories, you can start
Uh-huh.
with the ending and you can actually put that at the beginning. And then it is the process to getting to that end. Huh.
I've done it. Yep. I did it in a story I published just a couple years back. Yeah.
Oh, wow. Okay. That sounds amazing. So have you got anything coming out soon, like book-wise?
Book wise, I do not have a current publishing contract at the moment, though I hope to soon. I have been working on some longer fiction, also plays, and then also, as you know, I'm an astrologer, and so there's astrology books in there too. So it's kind of a non-fiction component to what I do as well. Um, so yeah, I've been busy. So there's a lot to get out there eventually. As of right now, I don't have a timeline. I do have short stories. I have one coming out this month, one coming out next month. I have actually articles. I have an article in the Mountain Astrologer coming out in, is it April, I think. And then another astrology article that is uh possibly will come out in the Archive Journal. So yeah, so shorter pieces. I definitely have. I think I just had a short story published just in the past couple weeks. It's enough now with the short works that it's hard for me to keep track actually of
I
all
think
the
you'll
different
find you'll probably be adding children's books to your list.
ones. That's cool. Yeah, I've written children's stories here and there throughout my career, like short stories that are geared towards kids. I have a sister who's 16 years younger than me, so when I was in my 20s, she was a child, and so yeah, it was great fun. I wrote a lot of kind of stories geared for children. It's great.
Mm. And that there again is a different format or a different formula because the audience that you're gearing to is very different, and how they would bring it in is again different from adults. So, you know,
That's very
that's a
different.
whole new thing on its own.
Mm-hmm. Yep, exactly.
Now, James, I'm aware that you do have another conference call. I didn't get the time frame on that, but I'm hoping that we haven't gone over time. So I would
No,
like to
no,
sort of
we
close
gotta.
it down unless you've got something else you'd like to share, because I do know that you have another conference call coming up.
Yeah, thanks. We're fine. We can go for a
We
few
good?
more minutes.
Okay. So wow. So it's so just as a matter of interest,
Yeah,
and I know this is not astrology month, but
yeah,
in your chart,
yeah.
what what is what's the signatures you have in your chart to be a writer?
Um, Good question. Um, I have a trine that is almost exact between Mercury and Jupiter.
Oh, wow.
Um, so Mercury has to do with communication, and Jupiter has to do with kind of expansivity of both expanding whatever archetype it's with, like expanding the horizon of it. So
Mm.
expanding the communicative faculties. It also has to do with publishing, because publishing is a way of
Jupiter.
expanding our message out there to the world, and Mercury is associated with one's message. I think it also can like Jupiter tends to kind of draw in a bunch of disparate things and make them harmonized into a whole. And I think that can help with kind of plot creation, and it gives kind of a boisterous uh quest quality to things, kind of like a uplifting energy there. Otherwise, I have I mean, I would say I'd say anybody can be a writer, not that you have to have any of
No,
these
no, I tend to
aspects.
agree with you, but
Yeah,
I do
yeah.
notice that
Really,
it's
yeah,
more prolific with when people have certain type of signatures in their chart.
yeah. Well, I'll say two things. Like one is my own chart. Yeah, there's a couple of things that could be classically thought of associated with writing, like the Mercury Jupiter trine, Mercury square Pluto, which can give kind of a Pluto tends to give a propulsion and a kind of irresistible urge towards something, and Mercury is associated with communicating, writing. And also you can write about Plutonic topics, which are kind of
Transformative in nature.
transformative, deep, hidden intrigue, things like that. And I have Saturn and Leo in the third house. So the third house is the house associated with writing, kind of communicating ideas.
Mm.
And then Saturn is kind of one's work. And Leo is kind of a bit of a flashy, showy sign there. I also have the ninth house associated with publishing, and that's Aquarius is there for me, which kind of fits for publishing articles about astrology and just publishing in general.
Exactly.
Kind of avant-garde or alternative type themed written pieces. So yeah, and then other than that, I'll say also in regards to the birth chart, when someone sits down to write, if somebody happens to be interested in astrology as well, it can be a great pairing because astrology adds an extra note of fun to the art of writing, because when you write like fiction, for instance, or poetry or something creative, oftentimes, say you write short stories or you write novels, those short stories and those novels are going to have themes in them. They're going to have themes, like what are the tensions that are propelling the characters and the plot? What are the tensions that are seeking to be resolved in the elements of the story? What are the tensions that the story's wrestling with? And, creative people oftentimes try to reconcile their own internal tensions through the creations they create. Um, and so, once you've written some stories and novels, you can look back at your chart and just gain this extra note of insight, both into what you've written and into yourself, and see that the tensions in the chart and the themes in the chart are oftentimes can be seen, can be sensed in the themes and the tensions and the creative work and the short story and the novel. And it's just so fascinating. It's so fascinating. It gives such insight into oneself, gives insight into one's creative process. It gives added extra layer of texture of appreciation
I tend
to
to
the
agree with that
story.
because
Um,
you can be creating a character and you
uh-huh,
can give them an Aries type energy sort of
uh-huh,
thing, like that kind of thing. And and if you know your astrology well, then you know the challenges and the pitfalls and the positives of each sign. And it's like each person, each character, if they're depicting a certain sign, doesn't have to come up in the book, but just in their energies and in their behavior, you can also give them their own challenges through that as well.
yeah, exactly. And you can, your own um kind of like your own themes in your life, your own personality, when you write these other characters, this world's getting created and these other characters are getting created. In a sense, they're kind of like personas of your own aspects of your own psyche and subconscious.
Mm.
And so, these characters, it's like they're giving voice to aspects of your subconscious. And you know, when you look at that, you look at yourself and you look at your chart, they all three can reflect on each other and illuminate each other.
Mm.
It's fascinating. And you can do the same thing for other authors actually that you're a fan of. You can look at their written work and then you can look at the charts and they'll both illuminate each other. So if you want to understand their chart better, you can look at the themes of their written work. If you want to understand their written work better, you can look at the themes of their chart and they'll just mutually
Ah.
illuminate each other.
Now that would be interesting to compare the Harry Potter series to J.K. Rowling's chart. I've not done it, but it would be interesting to see the themes that in her chart and see how they're reflected in the books.
Totally. Oh my God. And yeah, yeah,
As an example, she's just the first one that came to mind.
totally. And then similarly,
Mm.
another fun layer that you can layer on to this whole process is that we oftentimes will get unconsciously attracted to authors who are wrestling with similar themes that we're wrestling with and have some aspects of the birth chart similar to ours. And that is the case for all artists. You oftentimes find that people, whether they know astrology or not, even if they do know astrology, it's still oftentimes unconscious. They'll get attracted to music from musicians or, you know, like literature or directors, actors. And then if you ask, like, who are you a fan of? Who are you most a fan of in terms of actors? Who are you most a fan of in terms of writers, artists, painters, whatever? And then they give you the list, and then you look at the birth charts of those people on the list, and then you look at the birth chart of the person you're asking. Oftentimes you'll see some similarities there. Like if that person has like Venus square Pluto, you'll see oftentimes a lot of in the musicians and the artists that they admire, you'll find a fair amount of the Venus square Pluto.
Yeah.
And so what's subconsciously happening there is that they're appreciating that, oh, this artist is trying to work out through this creativity, these archetypal tensions that I can relate to because I have similar kind of tensions inside myself. So that's another layer of this exploration that is just so rich.
It never ceases to amaze me how you can use astrology in almost anything. It's just the one thing in my life where if I need a clarification, I just go, okay, let's just go and have a look what's going on. Often when I go and make a decision and I haven't consulted the energies that are happening on the day, I'll give you a brief example of something here. I was sitting in the chair one day and my chest was like, whew, this isn't good. I was literally getting electric light. I described it to the doctor like I was getting lightning bolts in my chest.
Oh, wow.
I have heart disease on both sides of my family, and I do have the signature for heart attack in my chart.
Oh.
So I said to my partner, I said, okay, I need to go to the hospital, ASAP. And so got, 20 minutes away, got there. Anybody who's coming in with chest pain, they get seen straight away instead of having to wait. Got in, doctor did an ECG, troponins, everything came back all normal. And he said, we would still like to keep you for 24 hours just for observation because you've had the chest pain. Well, I looked at him and I said, I hear that, but number one, at the time I was still nursing, I said, I'm actually a nurse of this hospital. I'm an ICU nurse. I said, we don't live that far away, and looking at all the people in the waiting room, you don't have enough beds. So how about I go home, and if I'm needed to come back, I'll come back. And I said, you can trust me on that because I'm really in tune to my body. He said, okay. So he let me go. And then I went, okay, I'm going to have a look at my chart. And you'll never guess what planet was doing its thing.
What was it?
Uranus.
Oh, really?
Yep, it was doing its thing to my physical sun. So there was an aspect going on. It was a few years ago. So whatever the aspect was, I can't remember, but it wasn't. And so I just went, oh my God, Uranus. So all I needed, being a medical, I hadn't written my, I hadn't finished my books at that point either. But I knew Uranus was connected to a lack of magnesium. So they just pumped me up with fluids, in the hospital, and when I got home, I just took a bit of magnesium, and I just kept taking it over the next few days. I thought, well, because when you have a planetary aspect, you can actually become depleted of certain vitamins and minerals, and it can actually play havoc in your body if your thresholds are low. So I just topped up my magnesium, and I didn't have another event. Haven't been back to the hospital since then, and I'm going back, what are we now? 3, 6. I'm going back at least 7, 8 years. But when I looked at the astrology, to me, it was clear on why I was getting the heart attack. But actually, it wasn't a heart attack. It was just pain. It was just pain, and because of my genetics, it's something I don't ignore. And I would advocate that you never ignore any kind of pain you get in your chest. Even if you think it's going to get better, do not ignore it. It could be a silent heart attack. So that was all good. And then, of course, I started being a little bit more conscious about my health and da-da-da. And I went down this whole new journey. And I see a natural doctor. And a couple of years ago, he said to me, oh, your heart assessment, and we know that you've got it in your family. He said to me, you have a 2% chance of having a heart attack. Okay. So that was a bit like, because the nature of Uranus, it kind of wakes you up.
Right.
So it was like it was waking me up in my body. And then I decided, right, I need to make some changes here, because if I'm getting this, then, sure, it was an astrological trigger, but it would not have triggered if something wasn't there for it to trigger. You hear what I'm saying?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
So it kind of put me on a bit of a journey to be a little bit more health conscious where my heart was concerned. And, it was I think it was about 7 years ago. So that's a Saturn cycle. So now it's like, I feel like I'm in my 40s. I'm riding around like anything, and sometimes you need that little bit of something to wake you up. And of course, as we know, that's what the planet Uranus does.
Yes. Great awakener.
It's the great awakener, yeah. So whether it be a physical awakening, or whether it be a psychological awakening or a spiritual awakening, it is an awakening, nevertheless.
Yep. Yep.
And if you don't, what's the word I want? If you don't listen to that awakening, then it becomes a breakdown.
Yep. Yep. Yeah. Yeah. And I guess that brings in terms of the short story, yet another aspect of how astrology can illuminate the process of writing a short story is that there's also your transits.
Yeah.
Your transits, you may have transiting planet, like a significant transit, which means, the planets in the sky are going through a significant movement in relation to where they were when you were born. And then you get seized with some theme or something that you want to explore, something that you want to create. And usually that is related, like when you have a big transit, it's kind of like a big shift, a big new type of energy in your life that wants to be explored. And so the creative avenue can be helpful in exploring that energy and kind of understanding what the universe is asking of you right now and what time it is on your kind of clock of growth.
I like that, the clock of growth. Actually, that's a good title for a story.
Yeah, the clock of growth.
Yeah. James, it's always a pleasure talking to you. You have so much knowledge, and I love it when I could just go, take it all in, take it all in. So I think we've kind of exhausted the topic now. I think we've talked a lot about it, but thank you, because I've learned a lot today around the short story that I didn't know before. I'm going to have a go at maybe doing one myself. We'll see. But thank you again, and I appreciate you taking the time out.
All right. Thanks so much. Pleasure chatting as always.
Namaste, my friend.
Bye.